is regarding our calls regarding enforcement, especially during during COVID. And so tonight we have our Director of Enforcement and Bylaw Services, Paul Morrison, and JP. You might want to just highlight your title specifically.
Yes, I'm the Manager of Bylaw Enforcement.
That's right. So we have our two sort of most trusted individuals in enforcement and bylaw services. And again, thank you very much for joining us today. So over the past months, I've been hosting Facebook Live sessions so that we can get a bit in depth on topical matters during the COVID-19 pandemic. And anecdotally, JP and Paul, surprisingly to me, wherever I go, what seems to be the hot topic is enforcement. And certainly we know what a great job our bylaw services are doing. And last week in council, we recognized your leadership, Paul and JP, for just really stepping up during a very difficult period. To reminder to everyone out there tonight that on November 23rd, Brampton, as part of the Region Appeal, was placed under the grey lockdown level of Province of Ontario's Keeping Ontario Safe and Open framework. When stricter measures such as the grey level are introduced, we know it comes with mixed reactions. On one hand, we recognize that it's a necessary step for our collective safety. On the other hand, we see the severe impact on our businesses, the backbone of our economy. Most important of all, I think we have to remain grateful to our essential and critical workers as they continue to show up each day to keep our city safe and moving. As cities move through the various levels of the provincial framework, it becomes critical for how we respond and enforce safety measures. To throw some light on what are the restrictions on how the city is enforcing, I have with me today Paul Morrison again and JP, our Director and Manager of Enforcement and Bylaw Services. So we'll start going off to our first question, and before we go to your questions, and please send in your questions right here on Facebook Live. I know Paul and JP that many phones are ringing off the hook, or in this case, our cells or smartphones we keep getting texts and so on. Can you tell us, first of all, provide some context for everyone out there, the type of calls that we're getting, what's the volume, and if you can speak to just again the amazing work that our officers are doing in terms of, you know, how do we run a shift, how many people we have on one time at night working, and how do we divvy up the city, so you know, from Brampton East to here in Brampton South. So you can just give a little bit of a sort of a sneak peek on how do we organize ourselves, and I'll hand it over to you two to sort of set the stage to give people that sort of inside view.
Thank you, Councillor Medeiros. You're right. You know what? When we transitioned from the previous levels of enforcement to the red zone was something new to us, and people panicked a little bit. The conditions we put in were all governed by the provincial government. There were regulations to set down, and then we still had our mask bylaw that the city of Brampton had imposed. It's still in effect. When they went to red, we did see some concern. We did get a lot of calls because people weren't sure what red meant, and we were responding in accordance to those calls. However, when we went to gray was a whole new level for people. Then the understanding was such that, what do we open, what do we close? We're not sure. We just went from red. How do the red conditions affect the gray conditions? And people, they didn't grasp at first that gray is pretty much a shutdown. It's the last step to shutting everything down across the whole city. So we fielded a lot of those calls, and when we field calls, we try to educate those people that call, but we also try to take that and go, this is probably good for the masses education, in the sense that when somebody called about a restaurant being overcrowded, so we answered that call. Then we went to our strategic communications, Jason Tamming, Director Tamming and his group, and then we made sure that we went back out and tried to reach as many people with those answers, so we could limit the calls coming in, so people had a good awareness. And that's been our practice right through since the end of March to do for most of these things. I can tell you that in the March when we first started, it was so easy. The province put in a very few amount of regulations. We were able to enforce it and people knew what those rules were. Since March, we've had over 160 iterations of the regulations. So every time the province makes a decision, they put out a new set of regulations. So we go back, we study them, and then we try to educate the public once again on those regulations. So now we're into so many, 160 iterations. People are confused. We get it. So we're showing as much patience to educate, to inform our public as we can. And we appreciate that, you know, they have those questions. So we answer as best we can.
And you're right, Paul, in terms of the our officers being involved in the whole process, this is all new to them. They were used to deal with, you know, noise parties, public nuisance, and now they've tacked on an additional responsibilities under the Provincial Act. So it's been a challenge, but they have stepped up to the plate and really took on this challenging Provincial Act that we have to deal with on a regular basis. And our call volume has gone up significantly, obviously, because of COVID. We had to prioritize where do we go first? Do we deal with COVID? Or we would deal with parking issues? It's an obvious answer. We dealt with the COVID related complaints initially, and that's where we're sending our officers initially. When we get the complaint, we analyze, determine what kind of a complaint it is, send our officers to that particular call, become a COVID related call, and deal with it appropriately, whether by way of charges, education, awareness, depending on the situation. Every case is different. So when the residents are calling us, it says, well, I've been calling about parking in front of my house and no one's attending. Well, we have two options. I can attend to your parking related, or I can attend to a COVID. Right now, we're being asked to deal with COVID related complaints, and that's our priority. It's not that we don't want to attend to your parking or other municipal complaints. It's just that right now that our focus is on COVID related complaints. So that's where we're focusing our efforts, and our officers in full capacity have been responding to those calls and challenging calls.
So Councillor, I can tell you one thing. Since March 24th, we have answered over 49,000 calls for service COVID related.
Wow.
Proactive and reactive, 49,000 since March. So.
Wow. And I just want to touch on what JP, rightfully so, the challenge that we hear as councillors, and I even find it surprising sometimes. And I just want, you know, for those watching, and it's not us about, shirking away from our responsibilities. But when I get residents who call me and say, you know, I put in a call on a parking infraction, and they'll call the next day, and our staff go out, and then they'll call me a couple days later and say, well, you know, the cars are back on the road, and it just sometimes it frustrates me, quite honestly, especially when I know the work that your officers are doing, and especially with the focus that we have right now on COVID. And you know, sometimes people don't understand that, and I understand that people really express their views and see their life within their lens, and they sometimes don't appreciate first how large a city we have, and second, all these infractions, and and that is certainly an issue. So in terms of one question I always get as well is people mix up responsibilities between our bylaw officers and Peel Police. So who's responsible for what? How do we coordinate? How do we sort of work together during this period of COVID?
Great question, Councillor. And it's not only our relationship between bylaw and Peel Police, but we also have our relationship with public health, who have a responsibility for enforcement. And then the newly minted government task force, where they have amalgamated different entities like the Ministry of Transport, the Ministry of Labor, and other enforcement pieces within the province. And they also have a part to play. So it's a very coordinated effort between all four groups. But I'll let JP explain the police piece for you.
So Peel Police is primarily responsible for the, what's the act I'm thinking of?
Reopening Ontario?
No, the Quarantine Act.
Quarantine Act.
So the Quarantine Act. So they're responsible to make sure that they've got orders they have to follow, and to make sure that people are complying with the Quarantine Act. So that's their role primarily. So I'm told that they have hundreds of those to follow up. So the COVID-related calls that we're getting, all the complaints have been downloaded to us as bylaw enforcement officers. So then the noise complaints that are associated with gatherings, the non-essential business, essential business, all those are primarily being investigated by bylaw enforcement officers. So we occasionally will attend a gathering where people are uncooperative. We'll seek the assistance of our partners, law enforcement, Peel Police. They'll attend, and with their assistance, will obtain the information necessary to lay charges when they deliberately break the law and they refuse to comply with us. Individuals who refuse to comply by providing identification, there's a hefty fine of $1,100 that we can issue a ticket. They can also be arrested for obstruct police if they go that far. So we've seen it in certain jurisdictions that recently. So this is the kind of stuff that we do. We work really closely with Peel Police to make sure that when the individuals, residents, or occupants are deliberately breaking the law, we enforce it with the assistance of the police.
So, and further to that, Councillor, we also work closely with public health. And where people will notice that is primarily for restaurants and businesses. We sort of assist each other in those investigations. Public health have a limited amount of public health enforcement team, and they have to do the whole region. So we understand that. So we try to pick up as much of that work as we can on their behalf. But we are constantly in communication with them. We meet as a group weekly, formally, and then informally, we probably meet every day as a group to make sure we're consistent in our enforcement messaging. We're consistent in our opening and closing of businesses, and making sure that we are up to date in legislation. So it is a hard dance, but we have to have that constant communication.
No, that's great, and it's so good to hear. And sometimes we don't appreciate how many entities you're working with, and certainly notwithstanding also with our fire department, there's a sort of a lot of coordination as well, and in terms of the work that you're doing. Just before we open it up to questions, so one of the calls I get all the time and is I see a group of young people in a plaza, and why can't police or bylaw officers go there and break it up, because I see them every other day at different sort of plazas. So young people getting together, playing music, cars, late night, and I know there's been some hot spots. But have you seen sort of, has that been a recurring issue a lot? Those are some of the calls that I get a lot of, especially in certain pockets of Wards 3 and 4.
So Councillor, great question. We have attended to these different plazas where these gatherings are taking place. We've sought the assistance of Peel Regional Police. We've actually done some proactive blitz in certain areas to curb this particular problem. We've also working with the property managers of these places and plazas and directed them to hire private companies, private security companies, to help with the curb this problem of loitering and gathering. If we find individuals who are breaking or in violation of the Provincial Act, we will lay charges. If the police are present, they will assist us in laying charges. And what the public has to understand is, because we're there and there's a large gathering, we have to look at our safety as well. So if I've got 2 or 3 officers, there's a gathering of 50 individuals in the plaza, our safety is number one. That will be my message to all the officers. Make sure you're safe first. It's not worth getting hurt over a ticket. If we can do safely, if we can do it with the assistance of the police, we will lay charges. We will send a message loud and clear that you're not to violate the Provincial Act or any of our bylaws in those plazas. So we're proactively doing it. We continue to respond to complaints as needed, but we, as a team, we work closely with our law enforcement partners to ensure that this is an area that we can hopefully stop.
So, Councillor, just one thing that maybe twigged with what JP was saying, and I'll give you an example. Last weekend, we went to a residence that 6 sisters?
Seven
Sisters were occupying. We had a complaint that the residence was over the allowable limit. So we sent our officers to investigate, and they were polite. We always educate, warn, and if have to, charge. So we're educating, we're warning the people, we talk about them in the house, and it all worked out. We knew they were sisters, so they can cohabitate in the place. They didn't have over 10 people. And then we closed the file down, we went on our way. We received an email, probably a day later, a scathing email being very pointed towards our officers not doing their job. And we got back to the person to explain. But the moral of this story is sometimes the perception is not reality. So when we get a lot of complaints, we'll get a lot of follow-ups from people saying, why didn't you do anything? And we have to simply tell them the truth. The people holding the event or the people there were well within the law and the regulations to do so. So a lot of our 49,000 calls may appear to the public in general to be egregious violations of the regulation, when in fact, people are actually conforming. We don't charge as many people as people think because everybody's trying to follow the rules, but we do charge when they're not.
No, that's excellent. So we're going to now look at, and I apologize for those who see me looking down. I've had comments before. People say, look like I'm falling asleep. No, I'm actually looking at questions that are coming along, and due to eyesight and sort of my limitations in technology. So I'll get to the questions right now. We have an email from Robbie DeMaio. Good evening, councillors, Paul and JP. Good evening. And our first question, Arshdeep Sahi, weekly basis, how many complaints are you receiving on social gathering?
So our social gathering complaints are probably our second largest complaints. Our first being mass, of course. And for social gathering complaints, we don't receive that many during the week. We probably get half a dozen to a dozen during the week, and maybe a few more on the weekend. We were getting a lot more in the past when people weren't as sure of the rules. But now that the number is really limiting, it's hard to hide whether you're having a gathering. So when you were entitled to, the old number was
10 inside,
10 inside, 25 outside. It was hard for us to go and really do the counts because we have to come into your house and people don't want us in their house, and people don't want us in their backyards. So it was a little bit more difficult, but now that it's 10 inside or outside, very easy to do the counts. So
the gatherings are still occurring primarily on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. People want to get together. So that's where we're seeing somewhat of an increase in the private gatherings. We're seeing gatherings where people, the residents, are believing it's a gathering inside big box stores, for example. They're all inside a big store. So we're attending, dealing with the managers, ensuring that they're maintaining physical distancing inside, they're wearing their face coverings. So there's different types of gatherings that we are responding to, but the main one is the private gathering at the residence that is challenging for us because we're dealing with someone's private residence. So that's where the challenge is for us, to gather the evidence necessary to lay charges if necessary. But we're hoping people, and we're confident that people are doing their best to comply with the regulations.
But interesting enough, so if you have a social gathering at your house and you have 10 people there and 4 are family, and you have 6 people and not family, you still have to employ social distancing to a degree. You have and masks. Go ahead, JP.
So the current legislation, when it comes to the gray zone, the lockdown, you can't have a gathering outside of your own household. So if you want to have your neighbor over for a gathering, that's against the violation, against the Provincial Act. So there's no more of this gathering. So you can have, if you just 10 of you living in this house, that's fine. You can have a gathering within your own household, but do not invite your neighbor. Do not invite Uncle Sam and everybody else around, because that would be a violation of the act. As far as being outside, you're entitled to have 10 outdoor, but inside, there's no one coming in your house other than those that reside there. Let's make that very, very clear, because we're in lockdown.
No, thank you. So we do have a couple of questions I think we answered already. One was regarding complaints in big box stores. Another question from Enrit Sahi, working relationship with Peel Regional Police and how's it coordinated? And I think you guys did a great job answering that. And so our next question is from Ivan Macri. So essentially, he's questioning in terms of our ticketing, especially when we start ticketing compared to other cities, why aren't we being more, I guess, enforcing this with, being more forceful in comparison to other cities. And I don't know if their data exists, but again, before we give a ticket where there's a financial a penalty, again, we give a warning and then we provide a ticket. Maybe just, are we too lenient here in Brampton?
I certainly don't believe so. And I've spoken to other bylaw enforcement staff of different cities. And I can tell you that the number of charges that we've laid in the city is probably the highest, if not in the province, if not in Canada, as far as I'm concerned. We've done our share of charges, and we've done certainly as much as we can in terms of awareness and education. We continue to do this, but there's got to come a time where enough is enough. We're at that stage. We're at lockdown. This is the highest level you can be. If you're deliberately, and I keep saying deliberately breaking the law, we will charge you. But we still want to get compliance. We want to give somebody a chance to comply. So charges is not always the answer. If someone is reasonable in their approach, they're trying to comply, that's when we'll do the education and awareness and give them a warning. But for the most part, I can tell you that the charges that we've laid here are significant and heavy, heavy charges.
So I can tell you, we were over almost 1,000 charges since we began. And we're probably in the area of $600,000 or $700,000 just in fines of those instant charges that we hand out. That's not including all the charges we are demanding that people go to court to defend themselves on. And those fines are yet to be decided when those court cases take place. So as JP said, in comparison to other communities, we charge high. We, from the get-go, when COVID came out and the regulations were put into place, determined as a team that we would not be afraid to go charge. And a lot of other communities for the first 6 months hardly laid a charge, but we were relaying many a week. And I think we set a pretty good standard for doing that. And I think where it really shows is all these calls we're going to that are conforming and following the regulations. I think that's because the fact we charge, and they know that, and they know we're out there and we have those discussions. So I think our proactive work doing that really is affected how many people we do actually charge.
And some of the people we've charged have been outside of our jurisdiction. We've seen people from Barrie, Stratford, London, Kingston, Niagara come into Brampton and violating the bylaw and our provincial act. So we have late charges on those that have come from outside of our area as well.
No, that's excellent to hear. And so I think the message is that we really take this very seriously in Brampton. And I can tell you anecdotally, I've heard, great things, how the mayor, he does his weekly press conferences, and we always see one of you gentlemen with the mayor providing updates on, in terms of infractions and what we're doing. So I think that we've certainly shown leadership in this area, and that was a great response. Gary Collins, shout out two most hardest working staff members at the City of Brampton. Thank you, Gary. Katerina Gialamis, and my apologies for the mispronunciation. Katerina, how are you going to balance the COVID calls with the parking infractions that will affect snow removal? More officers? Question mark.
Great question. We do have a good complement of officers that are eager to do a good job. And it's not only the parking calls. We have almost 100 staff within the enforcement divisions. And as you know, Councillor, we have 3 distinct areas. We have licensing, we have property standards, and we have municipal law enforcement. What we've done as a division is we've pulled from the licensing area and we've pulled from the property standards area for those officers to assist JP and his crew when they go out and do municipal enforcement and the COVID enforcement. So we've taken those additional resources. Council has over the last couple of years recognized the work we do here and the amount of calls we get from the citizens, and has given us more staff. This year we did receive a few more staff to help us with COVID calls, and we're receiving more into the new year because we know COVID doesn't end in January. So I'll let JP explain a little bit more on the other side.
So we've prioritized some of those calls. We're talking about the parking aspect of it, snow removal and everything else. Historically, we used to wait for a windrow to be around the vehicle before we lay charges. Now we're taking a proactive role. As soon as the plows have been dispatched into the City of Brampton and they're plowing, salting, our officers are out and about and charging those that choose to leave their vehicles on the road to avoid this wind road, to avoid this blockage and the salters not being able to get down the street, emergency vehicles not be able to get down to your house because of the roads not being plowed. So we're taking a proactive role. That particular call is called interference with snow removal and maintenance equipment. We've moved that to a priority 2. It's not just a parking, it's a very important priority for us. So we are responding to those vehicles that are interfering with the snow removal as a priority. Not as high as the COVID, obviously, because COVID is still the #1 priority, but we will respond to those vehicles that are interfering with the snow removal.
One of the things council did for us really early in 2019 was support us in new technology. It was a very timely support because when we rolled into early 2020 and COVID hit, we were able to change the way we did business. Lots of times when we went to a violation, we had lengthy paperwork to fill out, and then we had to get court summonses, et cetera, to get them to court. That was very time consuming. Calls were taking us an hour and 15 minutes. With the new technology, council supported Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Bowman, all the councillors that were out there. They really helped us in the sense that we were able to update our system. So now, where we were taking an hour and a half, we can go and do a call and issue instant infractions in 5, 7, 10 minutes. So we've gotten better at what we do, and that allows us to go to more calls. So it was very fortuitous at that time that we had that technology.
Wow, that's great. But really, it's amazing when you talk about the level of calls, all the calls that you get. It's just I myself and really, because I see more city staff just talking about what a great team we have, incredible bylaw enforcement team. Just the comments keep coming in. We have a comment from former Mayor Susan Fennell, one of my favorite persons, and certainly someone who I seek guidance on difficult decisions many times. I thank her for making those nice comments. We have a question too from someone who runs or is part of a resident organization. And Paul, we had the opportunity to get out and meet with them, Cynthia Hartzenberg. Her question is around, when we see these groups deliberately breaking the law, what number do we call? Is it 311? So I hear that all the time. Is it better to call my counselor? Is it better that I call 311? Some people have some frustrations. So can you just speak to us a little bit about, the process? What do you want residents to do?
Absolutely, 311. That's our main point of contact. That was set up to be the citizens' quickest, easiest call to make. And 311, great system, great people working there. They direct those calls to us very quickly. And they have the ability to prioritize what they give us. So if it's a safety issue, a COVID call, they'll give it to us over a parking complaint, as JP talked about earlier. So that's really what we want people to do, is get that 311 call in.
Yeah, and once they refer it to yourself, for example, it's a delay in for us to investigate. So if they call your assistant to report a complaint, it could be hours, it could be a day, and now we're not in a position to investigate that complaint. 311 is fairly immediate. Are we expecting to have the officer within 5 minutes? Perhaps. I'd love for every officer to be there within 5 minutes, but that's not practical. That's not real. We're going to be there as soon as we can, based on priority. And if there's a list of COVID, we're going to deal with the COVID calls and then attend to this gathering that you're referring to as soon as we can. So if people are frustrated, well, I've been waiting for 2 hours and they haven't showed up. It's not because we're sitting doing nothing. There's other higher priority calls that we are attending to and investigating.
One of the interesting things for us is people forget that where March 24th came around, COVID hit, everybody went home. Almost everybody went home and bunkered down for the long haul. People, when they come back to work, are working 25% of the time. Our enforcement branch has been up and running since pretty much early April, full time. So we're trying to staff, we're trying to go to those calls. And it's interesting. I mean, we're even to a point now where we're at the end of the year and nobody's really had holidays. So we're just saying, what are we going to do? Doesn't matter. We'll push that away. We're going to continue to answer the calls. 311 is the way to go.
Wow, that's amazing, guys. So we have, again, keep up great work. We have a comment. Thank you for all your updates, John Duke. Alex Samad says, yes, I agree. Great work, Paul JP. Great team. Abby Capel wants to know in terms of social distancing on ice. I guess on some of our, that leads to an interesting question on our recreational facilities and I guess on city property. We enforce them as well. Is that something that, so for example, if we see people social distancing on a city tennis court or on a city recreation center, we'll do the same type of enforcement, I would imagine.
Absolutely. The difference here, though, is enforcement bylaws taken upon itself. We do the public places, plus we do all the private residents. Jason Keddy, Director of Security Services, his team has taken over all city-related facilities.
Okay. Great.
So if it's a park, or sorry, if it's a rec center, his people will respond. If it's a park, they'll most likely respond, but we do respond to the outdoor activity areas within the city as well. So at Jacuzzi Park, all the Gage Park, all the different ones, you may get us or them responding to that. Indoors, it's primarily city security services.
And we work closely together with security services as well. So whenever there's a need for us to attend to deal with bylaw or Provincial Act violations, we will assist them to lay charges when necessary. So it's very, we work very closely with them to deal with various areas of the city.
It's interesting, Councillor. You know what? People don't see all the moving parts in the background. And at this point, I know people are giving us shout outs, but I need to return that saying Mayor Brown and the councillors of the city, yourself and all the other councillors, very, very open and receptive to what our comments have to be from enforcement. They listen, you listen to us, you understand our perspective, and you respond accordingly. It's refreshing to be in a city where you see that from council and the support we get. And that's why we can do good work out on the street.
No, thank you, kudos, and thank you. And certainly we are our feet are to the fire with our residents, and and certainly the level of service that the City of Brampton staff provide is just really top notch. So we have a question here from Jennifer Nicole Abrams. What are the charges now? And then after I'll group it up with another question in terms of what are the biggest challenges that bylaws facing the gray lockdown? And that's from Gagandeep Najjar. So I guess with us going to this shift into the gray lockdown, and you touched upon there's more clarity to what we were in the previous zone, but what are you finding any difference right now, I guess, with the different stipulations in this gray zone that we're in right now?
A great question. Where I'd like to go with this one is, yeah, we are finding some challenges, and one of the challenges is cold weather. So as soon as the cold weather hits, people are not going to be outside as much. So our challenges shift to indoor activities. We fear that the house parties, the gatherings will rise in number. We also fear that people getting closer to Christmas are going to want to shop. So we'll have to deal with the illegal businesses, or not the illegal businesses. The businesses are dealing outside of the regulations, where they're letting people into their store to do a little bit of shopping. But they don't realize, yes, it's cold out and your consumer looks cold and they don't want to do curbside service, but don't let them in the shop, because that's the rule. And we're going to find that those rules, people may try to break them as we go along. So we're worried about that. So we're very diligent with doing advanced screening and surveillance on that. Our fire department under Chief Boyce, he's lent us the support of the fire prevention officers under Andrew Van Holt, and they've been wonderful helping us go in and look for these places that are in violation, and then we respond accordingly. We have to prioritize our work. We can't just drive around looking for them. So they're really our eyes and ears out there assisting us, which has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult time for the businesses out there. This is probably the season where they're making most of their money right now. And we're talking about essential, non-essential. And for us, from an enforcement perspective, is trying to determine, are you permitted to be open? Are you an essential? Are you non-essential? That whole debate and challenges that we deal with on a regular basis, people are calling to say, well, this little store on the corner is open. Are they allowed to be open? Then we dive into the legislation, trying to understand to make sure that they are in fact allowed and permitted to be open. So those are the very daily challenges we deal with, because we want to work with the individuals that's their business, that's their livelihood. We understand that. We want to make sure that they are open legally as opposed to having to shut down someone. That's the last thing we want to do. We're just following the rules that have been set by the province. And that's what the business owners have to understand. We're not there to shut you down, to close your business. Far from it. We'd love for you to thrive, but it becomes very challenging when we have a law to follow, and that's what we call the enforcement. We enforce the law.
Yeah, no, well said. Again, kudos out from Zelia Serpa. Thank you, bylaw officers, for your tireless efforts in the fight against COVID-19. A question by Bharat Prasad. Apparently there was some party at Shoppers World parking lot in front of Giant Tiger. Was there any calls regarding this party? Did we get any calls at Shoppers World on Sunday night? And don't worry about that, but I guess that speaks to what we talked about enforcing in the plazas. If we do get a call, we will react and come out and give tickets accordingly.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I just want to sort of push past that point and say, Councillor, people have to remember, we are by law enforcement. We are not police officers. We don't have the same equipment. We wear the same type of uniform. We don't have the same equipment, and we certainly don't have the same powers of arrest or detention or the ability to stop people. So when we do get these big crowds and we attend, we do with what we can, and it's really our interpersonal skills that get us as far as we get. We teach our people these skills. We teach our people de-escalation skills because we have to use those powers we have. So it's tougher to get to those places and deal with that car or a parking lot full of cars and people. And we also have to look at our safety officers, like JP says. Certainly we are always concerned about what mood the crowd is in. And we certainly look at, whether there's alcohol involved. So once again, the safety of our people, and we try to balance all that when we go and investigate.
Yeah, and that's such an important point when you talk about safety of our officers. For those watching today, can you share with us some of the sort of sticky situations that some of our officers might face or have faced, if that's something that we can share?
I mean, we've had officers who have been verbally threatened, and it's serious threats that where the police had to be involved, and arrests were made by the police as a result of those threats. So our officer safety, as I stated, is number one, and we've always maintained that from day one. But when someone takes that step where they're going to be threatening our officers or taking that step where they want to assault an officer, thank God we haven't had a situation where an officer has been assaulted, because our officers are careful. They're aware of their situation. They don't try to put themselves in a situation where it could be dangerous for them. But if someone does take that stand and decide that they want to threaten our officers or harm our officers, we will do whatever it takes to ensure that that person is dealt with the law, and the Peel Police will be involved. We will not stand by someone threatening us when we're conducting our job on a daily basis.
We have an excellent relationship with the superintendents from Division 21 and 22, Gormley and Chinzer. We meet as regular as we can. We talk about situations, and we enjoy their support right up to the chief, every last command officer. So we do have problems out there. We do face those. We did have a house party. We're near the beginning of COVID where our officer was assaulted and charges were laid. But when we have those incidents, we do publicize them. We tell the public those are happening, and we won't tolerate it. And I can tell you, people are very respectful of that. And that's why we don't have that many in the city of Brampton. People are fairly respectful of the uniform that comes to their door.
No, thank you. Nice comment again by Robbie DeMaio. Thank you for holding this forum. Clarification is much needed. Salina Medeiros, we appreciate all the hard work from our councillors and our mayor to try to keep the city safe. Hats off to our relentless bylaw officers. I know you have a tough job. Suyong Pradam, hello all, thanks for doing this. What is bylaw enforcement doing to ensure workplaces are following the rules? So I guess that's, again, you talked about working with Peel Public Health, and we've heard from our medical officer, and often for those regional council, we hear all the some of the spread is happening in workplaces, and our mayor has been very vocal about a lot of workers we have from Brampton and the industries that we have, essential workers, food processing, logistics. Do we get called to businesses, or is that the Ministry of Labor, or is that public health? How do we what's our role in that situation?
Another great question. I'm glad it was asked because we want to get this message out. So businesses are everything from the single owner, single clerk variety store, right up to the big supply warehouses. So we typically get involved in the smaller to medium-sized businesses. And businesses know under the Reopening Ontario Act, they have regulations to follow. They have to have a safety plan. They have to have sanitizing going on. They have to ensure masks are going on, etc. Signage. So we quite often, we go look for that and we do enforce. I can tell you in places of business, we even probably charged maybe 75% of our charges are for consumers not wearing their masks or not properly, but the rest are for business owners and clerks, etc., for doing the same thing. So we do enforce at those medium to smaller business levels. Those bigger factories, etc., we rely on the Ministry of Labor, we rely on public health and the other agencies because they're too big, they're beyond our capacity to do an effective job in there. And if we went and did that, our focus would be to that place all day because there's a lot of steps to ensure enforcement takes place properly in there. And we don't have the staffing to dedicate people to that large business all day. I need our staff on the street taking 10, 12, 14 calls a day and not one. So we do divide the work up. The work doesn't get pushed to the side. An entity does it and we coordinate who does that.
And we're making sure that the managers and those that are responsible to operate the business are taking in reasonable steps to ensure that the customers and their employees are following the rules. It's their responsibility as well. And we make sure of that. When we attend those places, we'll speak to the manager or the owners and say, you need to do the following. That's your job. I know you didn't sign up to be a bylaw enforcement officer, but that's your store. You need to enforce it because we can't do it all. So we're making sure that they are aware of this, what the rules are, so that they're well informed. And then they can assist us in ensuring that there's compliance in the laws.
Well, thank you very much. Really, I have another real nice comment again from Lynn Solier. Very challenging times. Thanks for clarifying, giving insight and limitations that bylaw enforcement face on a daily basis. And that's kind of why we do these things, because as much as I can try to explain, and we know that another part of your job is getting back to residents. I know many times, Paul and JP, we ask you to contact residents directly, explain to them what's the situation. So it's not just, the work that people see is all this and when you talk about, you 311, you talk about counselors, you guys are getting questions from everywhere and from everyone. So, that is really challenging. One of the questions I had regarding how does, when it comes to wedding services, funeral services, rights, indoor and outdoor gathering limits, can you explain a little bit on is there any special limitations for wedding services or for funeral services? Do they have any exemptions, or do they have to face the same standard what it says during this great lockdown, which is no more than 10 people in a social gathering from same household?
So I'm going to start by saying, Councillor, in the city of Brampton, I've seen excellent support from the religious community here, and part and parcel that goes to them wanting to participate and being part of keeping our community safe. But the other part goes to the mayor and his staff and the councillors. When you come to us and you do the town halls, I know the mayor's held town halls with the religious places of worship. I know you have. I know other councillors have. Councillor Singh. We are very interactive with that community, very interactive, and we get great response. We can talk about the celebrations that happened a couple of weeks ago. We did have one place of worship that, we had to deal with, and unfortunately it was an incident, but almost 99.9% of the rest of the places of worship followed the rules on that weekend. And it was a very successful weekend as far as not having to charge people. JP?
So the current legislation when it comes to weddings and ceremonies and religious services is, I call it very simple, 10-10, 10 in and 10 out. So you can only have 10 people inside a place of worship and 10 people outside waiting to go inside the place of worship. So it's very simple. If people remember 10-10, they'll know while the lockdown is on, that's all you're allowed to have inside. So if you want to go to a place of worship, you want to pay your respect, only 10 people will be allowed inside.
One of the best points of this, or interesting points for us, is we view this as 28 days is a hard number for us, but we can't let off and relax saying it's only 28 days. What will it really matter? It's very important that we do the right thing for the 28 days. One is because we want to get out of these high COVID numbers, but two is what happens if the government, and we can't predict, if the provincial government comes back and extends that time period. We have to make sure that the community is prepared for that as well. So we try to keep that standard of enforcement high so everybody is following the rules.
So I'll give you a situation we just had recently, because we've got people that have called us. Someone is having a religious service in a private dwelling. There's 10 people inside, perfectly legal. So people are calling, says, well, there's a gathering inside a residence. That's a prime example where people don't understand the law. They're calling us to complain about something that is legal. So on this particular, and it's happening as we speak. There is a service taking place now where 10 people are inside following the rules, social distancing, wearing masks, and they're within the law.
The interesting piece of that is they've already checked with us and they have 10 people in, and those 10 people will stay for a period of time and they will leave. And then there's another group of 10 coming in. So they're responsible to make sure the place is sanitized, clean, and people are social distancing, wearing masks when they're in there, but they're staying to their maximum of 10. People are creative of doing the right thing in the right ways.
Well said. So we have a question here from Sherry on Ishakse, and again, my apologies for the pronunciation. If someone has a medical exemption and is approached by a bylaw officer, can the officer request proof of exemption?
Another good question. No, the officer can't. All the person has to do is state, I have a medical exemption. That's all. Where we get into a little bit of misunderstanding is the businesses. So people that go to businesses and they have a medical exemption feel they have the right to go into the business and shop uncontested. And that's not entirely true. When you go to a business, the business is owned by a particular person. That's their place, their property. So if I have a medical exemption and I go into your store, Councillor, and you sell product XYZ and you say, even though you have a medical exemption, Paul, we're not going to let you in. And I say, well, you have to let me in. No, you don't. You may have somebody at home that has asthma or something, and you may not want COVID at all in your store, or even the chance of it. So you have a right as a store owner to prohibit the entry of that person. We can't prohibit on the prohibited grounds, on the constitutional grounds, but you can prohibit if it's reasonable. And if I don't want you in my store, even though you have a medical exemption, you can't. We had a big box store recently, and it went North American wide, has determined that you cannot shop in that big box store unless you're either wearing a face mask or a face visor. And they implemented that about a week and a half ago. And that's well within their right to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we have our CEO is with us today. I thank you, Mr. Barrick. Well done, gentlemen. In terms of, one questions that we get a lot, and again, we talked about we're enforcing COVID, but we also deal with parking restrictions. Can you talk about some of the risks regarding illegal secondary units and lodging houses, especially, the risks that they pose at this time when we are trying to control the spread of the virus? And, that's an area, and I know we have a task force, but as we talked about, as we continue to do parking infractions, we're still investigating illegal secondary units.
Yeah, good question. And it really is the same risk as any other residential premise. We haven't stopped investigating secondary units. We haven't stopped investigating lodging houses. This year, council gave us new staffing to help us to do that, and we've just got them rolling. CAO Barrick, who gave us a little shout out, again, gave us some more bodies to help with some enforcement issues. So we're still doing those things, but we're doing them a little bit more cautious, because we're sending our officers into every premise we go into is a potential place that COVID may exist. And people don't necessarily know they have it in that place or it exists, but it may be in there. So we have slowed down our investigation pace on that to ensure our officers' safety is paramount. We make sure they have the PPE equipment. They make sure they do proper procedures, and they have the option to back out. But we are still doing that. We're still investigating it. What the public see are the larger numbers of people within a building or a premise. So if you have a secondary unit in the basement, you may have 5 people living upstairs, and you may have 10 people or 6 people downstairs for a total 11. That would be allowed if the secondary, because you have a secondary unit in the building. But for numbers, no, you know what? We aren't seeing any great problems there. For a COVID investigation, but we're still doing those.
And we still get the calls for parking related violations because of the number of people in a residence. There's just not enough parking for them. So we're still receiving those complaints. And again, based on priority, we'll attend and investigate it to see if there's violations occurring at these particular lodging house that you're referring to. So it sometimes, depending on the number of people, and if they all have a vehicle, it's going to impact the parking ability anywhere around that house.
One of the nice things the council did for us for the community was pass our nuisance bylaw. So that's really been helpful. So we do go and investigate COVID related offenses. We do the numbers, but there's other tools now that are available to us to help keep those numbers down. So if you have a secondary unit and you invite people over, people park around, we put those nuisance parking rules into effect. Or large gathering noises, noisy parties, etc. That allows us to help mitigate those type of calls and lessen them.
No, thank you. You know, one thing I see that we're close to wrapping up, but one thing that amazes me is part of your work, and I've had a challenge trying to keep track. Whenever the government announces changes in zones and in different, how do you go about educating your officers, getting them up to speed, what to enforce? Do they, for example, have access to technology that they can always refer to? How do you prep them where, from everything I've heard, everything in what we're seeing tonight, their professionalism they have when they address issues and calls, it's just all the prep work that goes into getting them into that state. How do you pass the message on that we're going to enforce this now?
Another great question. You know what, Councillor, we run our division with 2 entities, our frontline operational staff that are going out to do the job, and our management team forms what we call a bit of an emergency measures team, emergency managers team. So I can tell you every day we meet as a team, we look at the regulations that come out, and then we dissect them. We look at what the regulation means to the city, what the regulation means to our workload, and how we have to best prepare our officers to do that. And we get together, we do that, and then we spread out and we go do that training. We do the messaging. We reach out to Jason Tamming and his crew. We do messaging for the community, let people know we're coming. We have more to do. We do with 311. We ensure they're fully informed of what we're going to do. We check with legal. There's a lot of moving parts in the background that people just don't see. And then it's the training of our people. And what you have to remember is we have to train 4 shifts of people. So we don't have everybody in the office on Monday morning, all 100 staff. We have a portion of that because we have a portion that are working at nights and we have a portion that are off on days off so they can work the next couple of days. So we have to figure out a training method to do that. This was a really good last 12 to 14 months in the sense that the city really caught us up in technology. So our staff have high quality phones that we can message on, do a lot of our service delivery on now. We have new computers in the car. We are very connected. So that enabled us to put our officers on the street for longer periods of time. They don't have to come back to do reports. They don't have to come back and do any of the general tasks they do on their computers. They can do it all on the street, but it allows us to push a lot of messaging out to them on the practices and the rules and the regulations under the Reopening Ontario Act and give them instantaneous messaging. So I'll give you an example. If the government comes in and makes a change tomorrow about the regulation, we will fan that out to our staff as soon as we confirm what the regulation changes are and how it affects them. And we have a procedure for them to act upon, to go out there and engage the public. And if they're on their day off or their day in here, it's already pushed to their phone, they have it. So they're prepared, their first day back at work, and our supervisors confirm that. We want to make sure we're doing it right. We don't want to charge somebody wrongly. We don't want to take anybody to court wrongly. We want to make sure we're doing the proper procedures.
And we all know that we're inundated with emails, and our staff are the same way. You can quickly read an email, not necessarily understanding what the law is. So we do spend the time on one-on-one or as a group. Do you understand what the legislation? Here's an example. So we try to simplify the legislation so they can understand and actually go on the street and explain that to the residents, because that's where it is. They're the front line. They're the ones being asked the questions on the streets. And that's where they need. So we spend a lot of time on one-on-one as a group and individually to make sure they understand the legislation.
We have a full complement of supervisory management staff, always working. And it's really the support mechanism for all our people on the street. And we're trying to answer those questions as soon as they come in.
Wow, that's amazing. Comment from Tanya, big hello to Tanya Goyen, where she talks about wonderful insights, information with clear, concise answers that is easy to follow. Thanks so much, Councillor Medeiros, Mr. Morrison, and Mr. Pierre. Great. And so I guess too, then, if someone wants to follow up on exactly knowing what sort of the new rules are, we do have the City of Brampton site in which there are Q's and A's, region appeal, and for example, businesses when they need questions of clarification, again, 311 is where people want to call if they need clarity, or do you suggest that they, is there a website that you want to direct people towards to find out exactly where they can get the information on all the changes?
So yeah, really good point. We work closely with, as I say, with strategic communications to roll out as much as we can. They're very supportive of us. But the other shout out that really needs to take place, and somebody who really helps us out a lot, is Claire Burnett, who's the Director of Economic Development. We work closely with her. We've been working closely with her with the restaurants. So not only do we try to inform the public, but we try to inform our peers within the organization so they can answer as good as we can and sometimes better. So,
yeah, no, and that's great comment. Like even for tonight, if it wasn't the support of our communications department, and I know our director of communication, strategic communication, Jason Tamming's on with us, and the support that they provide, it really speaks to sort of how truly this is a team effort, which goes between two levels of municipalities, between the region, the City of Brampton, and certainly everyone working together to try to address such a difficult issue. And certainly as frontline workers, our enforcement officers, one thing that really amazes me, that you guys have been full out, no holiday period. You're bringing on new staff, you keep training them. There's been announcements, like if there's one department which really deserves our support and our big thank you, certainly your department, and you two gentlemen are really the sort of the faces and the leadership of why Brampton is why we're successful, but at the same time we're really relying on you, and because enforcement seems to be one of the sort of number one things I hear on how we sort of take on COVID. So I thank you very much. And again, if anyone, remember the process is 311, call 311. They will get to your calls, and certainly we'll all be together working as we go forward. Is there any last comments that you have, JP and Paul?
Yeah, you know what, I've got one, and it's a little bit off topic, but I'm going to tell you, this city has prospered. Unfortunately, with COVID, there's a lot of negatives. This city has prospered in one sense. And I've only been here 4.5 years, but in my first 3 or 4 years, I see a city that was working effectively, but relatively silos, in the sense that this year, I have never seen such a solidification of effort by this city. The citizens really don't know how much positive has come out of this. The relationship building, the work getting done in this city is astronomical in the last 4 to 9 months because of that. And I think moving forward, once we get out of COVID, you're going to see this city continue to develop, to get better. And it's because of those partnerships we've developed inside. So I think it's very, very fortuitous for our community of Brampton.
Thank you very much. And thank you again, JP, Paul Morrison. Thank you to our communication and the support Jason Tamming is providing us. And thank you for everyone involved. And thank you for joining us tonight. And if, again, you have any further questions, you can call 311, or certainly, by all means, you can contact my office at 905-874-2634, 905-874-2634, or martin.medeiros@brampton.ca. Thank you very much, everyone. Stay safe, and remember to follow social distancing and wear masks at all time. And when you do see a bylaw officer, feel free to just go there and send them your regards and say thank you for the fine work they're doing. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.